Hello and welcome. Before we begin, I need to share something important with you. Everything we discuss today is general information only. It's not personal financial advice. Your situation is unique. Your family is unique. Your dreams are unique. So please use what we talk about today as a starting point, and then speak with a qualified financial advisor who can look at your specific circumstances. Now, let's talk about something that keeps many Australians awake at night: the assets test versus the income test. If you're over 50, approaching retirement, or already retired, these two terms probably sit in the back of your mind like uninvited guests. They create worry, they create confusion, and worst of all, they create fear. Fear that you've done something wrong, fear that you'll lose your pension, fear that the government will change the rules again just when you thought you had it all figured out. I want you to know something right now. You're not alone in feeling this way. I've sat across the table from hundreds of Australians just like you, good, hard-working people who did everything right. They saved, they paid off their homes, they put money into superannuation. And now, as they approach the finish line, they're terrified that the rules of the game have changed. And you know what? They have changed, multiple times. But here's the thing. Understanding how the assets test and the income test work isn't just about protecting your pension. It's about reclaiming your peace of mind. It's about sleeping soundly at night. It's about knowing that you can still enjoy your retirement without constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering if Centrelink is going to send you a letter that changes everything. So today, we're going to walk through this together, slowly, carefully, with real examples. By the time we're finished, you're going to understand exactly how these two tests work, why they exist, and most importantly, what you can do about them. Let's start with a simple truth. The Australian retirement system wasn't always this complicated. There was a time, not so long ago, when life was simpler. You worked for 40 years, you got your gold watch, you retired on the age pension, and that was that. The age pension started back in 1908. Can you believe that? Over a century ago. Back then, it was a simple means test. Did you have assets? Did you have income? If you didn't have much of either, you got the pension, the full pension. For decades, that system worked reasonably well. Most Australians didn't have significant savings. Superannuation, as we know it today, didn't exist. The family home was often the only real asset people owned. So the pension was there to catch you, to make sure you didn't fall into poverty in your final years. But then things started to change. In the 1980s, the Hawke and Keating governments introduced compulsory superannuation. Suddenly, Australians were building retirement savings, real wealth. The government's thinking was clear. If people have their own savings, they won't need as much pension. The pension could focus on those who truly needed it. That's where things got complicated, because now the government had to ask different questions. Not just, do you have income, but also, do you have assets? Shares, investment properties, money sitting in the bank? And that's when the assets test and the income test were born in their modern form. Now, you might be thinking, why two tests? Why not just one? That's a fair question, and it's at the heart of why so many people find this system confusing. Here's the simple answer. The government wants to measure your capacity to support yourself in two different ways. First, what could you be earning from your assets? That's the assets test. Second, what are you actually earning right now? That's the income test. They apply both tests to everyone. And here's the critical part. Whichever test gives you the lower pension amount, that's the one they use. Let me say that again because it's important. Centrelink applies both tests. They calculate what your pension would be under the assets test. They calculate what your pension would be under the income test. Then they give you the lower of the two amounts. It's not about which test you prefer. It's about which test reduces your pension more. Now, before we go deeper, let's take a moment to talk about the Australian economic context we're living in right now. You've felt it, haven't you? The cost of living pressure. Groceries that used to cost $100 a week now cost $150. petrol prices that swing wildly, energy bills that make you gasp when you open the envelope. Interest rates have been on a roller coaster. For years, they were at historic lows. People borrowed cheap money. Investors piled into property. Then, seemingly overnight, the Reserve Bank started raising rates. Suddenly, mortgages became expensive again. Even retirees with offset accounts or cash savings felt the pinch because while rates went up, so did the cost of everything else. And through all of this, the age pension thresholds have been adjusted, sometimes up, sometimes frozen, always leaving people wondering, where do I stand? This is why understanding the assets test and income test isn't just academic, it's practical, it's urgent, because in this economic environment, every dollar of your pension matters. So, let's roll up our sleeves and get into the technical details. But don't worry, I'm going to explain this in plain English. Let's start with the assets test. The assets test looks at everything you own. Your home is usually exempt. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But beyond your home, Centrelink wants to know about your cash, your superannuation, your shares, your investment properties, your cars, your caravan, your boat, everything that has value. They add it all up. That's your total assessable assets. Then they compare that total to a set of thresholds. These thresholds are different depending on whether you're a single or a couple. They're also different depending on whether you're a homeowner or a non-homeowner. As a general principle, if you're a homeowner, the thresholds are lower. Why? Because you already have the security of owning your home. If you're non-homeowner, the thresholds are higher because you need more assets to provide the same level of security. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If your assets are below the lower threshold, you're generally entitled to the full age pension. If your assets are above the upper threshold, you get no pension at all. And if you're somewhere in between, your pension reduces gradually as your assets increase. This gradual reduction is called the taper rate. For every $1,000 of assets above the lower threshold, your pension reduces by a certain amount per fortnight. The current taper rate sits at $3 per fortnight for every $1,000 of assets. So if you have $10,000 more in assets, your pension reduces by $30 per fortnight. Let me give you a rough example. And remember, these numbers are approximate because they change each year with indexation. Let's say you're a single homeowner. The lower threshold might sit around $300,000. The upper threshold might sit around $650,000. If you have $200,000 in assets, you're under the threshold, full pension. If you have $700,000 in assets, you're over the upper threshold, no pension. But if you have $400,000 in assets, you're in the middle. Your pension gets reduced by the taper rate. Now, let's talk about the income test. The income test is different. It looks at how much income you're actually receiving. This includes wages, if you're still working. It includes the deemed income from your financial investments. It includes rent from investment properties. It includes dividends from shares. One of the most important concepts here is deeming. Deeming is how Centrelink calculates income from your financial assets. They don't care what you actually earn. They assume you're earning a certain percentage. This is called the deeming rate. There are two deeming rates, a lower rate for the first portion of your financial assets and a higher rate for anything above that. Why do they use deeming? Because it creates fairness. Imagine two people. One keeps all their money in the bank, earning almost nothing. Another invests in shares, earning dividends. Without deeming, the person in the bank would get more pension, even though they have the same assets. Deeming prevents that. So, under the income test, Centrelink calculates your deemed income, adds any other income you have, and then compares it to the income threshold. Again, if your income is below a certain level, you get the full pension. If it's above a higher level, you get nothing. And if you're in between, your pension reduces gradually. The taper rate for income is 50 cents for every dollar of income above the threshold. Now here's where people get confused. They think, I have low income, so surely I'll pass the income test. But then they get caught by the assets test. Or they think, I don't have that many assets, so surely I'll pass the assets test. But then they get caught by the income test. This is why Centrelink applies both. They want to see which one limits your pension more. And here's a key insight. For many Australians, especially those with their wealth tied up in assets that don't produce much income, the assets test is the limiting factor. Why? Because you might have a valuable home unit, a caravan, some shares, and $600,000 in superannuation. Your income might be low, but your assets push you over the threshold. On the other hand, if you're still working part-time or you have a high-performing investment portfolio generating dividends, the income test might be your limiting factor. Let me introduce you to Bruce and Jenny. Bruce and Jenny are both 67. They're a married couple. They own their home in a suburb of Brisbane. It's a modest 3-bedroom house, fully paid off, worth about $600,000. But remember, the family home is exempt from the assets test. Outside of their home, Bruce and Jenny have the following assets. They have $400,000 in their combined superannuation. They have $50,000 in a savings account. They have a car worth $20,000. And they have a small caravan worth $30,000 that they use for road trips. Let's add that up. $400,000 plus $50,000 plus $20,000 plus $30,000. That's $500,000 in assessable assets. Now, Bruce worked for most of his life as a plumber. Jenny worked part-time as a school administrator. They didn't earn huge salaries, but they were careful. They saved where they could, they never carried debt, and now they're worried. They've heard stories, friends who lost part of their pension, neighbors who had to sell their caravan just to stay under the threshold. Bruce and Jenny don't want to make a mistake. So let's walk through their situation using both tests. First, the assets test. Bruce and Jenny are a couple, they're homeowners. The lower threshold for a couple who owns their home currently sits somewhere around $420,000. The upper threshold sits somewhere around $950,000. Bruce and Jenny have $500,000 in assessable assets. That puts them above the lower threshold, but well below the upper threshold, so they'll get a part pension. For every $1,000 above the threshold, their combined pension reduces by $3 per fortnight. They're about $80,000 above the lower threshold, so their pension reduces by roughly $240 per fortnight. The full age pension for a couple is approximately $1,600 per fortnight, so Bruce and Jenny would receive about $1,360 per fortnight under the assets test. Now, the income test. Bruce and Jenny don't work anymore. Their only income comes from the deemed income on their superannuation and savings. Let's say the deeming rates calculate their combined income at about $20,000 per year. That's roughly $770 per fortnight. The income-free threshold for a couple is around $330 per fortnight. Above that, the pension reduces by 50 cents for every dollar of income. So, their excess income is about $440 per fortnight. That means their pension reduces by $220 per fortnight. Under the income test, they'd receive about $1,380 per fortnight. Now, remember what I said earlier. Centrelink applies both tests and gives you the lower amount. Under the assets test, Bruce and Jenny get $1,360. Under the income test, they get $1,380. So, Centrelink uses the assets test. Bruce and Jenny receive $1,360 per fortnight. For Bruce and Jenny, the assets test is the limiting factor. Now let's imagine a different couple. Let's call them Tom and Margaret. Tom and Margaret are the same age. They also own their home, but their situation is different. They only have $250,000 in superannuation and savings combined, well below the lower assets threshold. However, Tom still works casual shifts as a consultant. He earns about $30,000 a year. Margaret has a small inheritance generating dividends. Together, Their assessable income is about $50,000 a year, or roughly $1,900 per fortnight. Under the assets test, Tom and Margaret would be eligible for the full pension because their assets are below the threshold. But under the income test, their income is well above the threshold. With income of $1,900 per fortnight, their pension would reduce significantly. In fact, they might not be eligible for any pension at all. For Tom and Margaret, the income test is the limiting factor. Do you see how different circumstances lead to different outcomes? This is why a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. This is why you need to understand your own situation. So let's talk about the pros and cons of each test. The assets test, in theory, makes sense. It says if you have significant wealth, you should use that wealth to support yourself. The age pension is for people who genuinely need it. But here's the problem. The assets test can penalize people who have been good savers, people who sacrificed holidays, new cars, and renovations to build up their superannuation. They reach retirement and find that their discipline is now working against them. It also creates what I call the caravan dilemma. You've worked your whole life. You've dreamed of buying a caravan and touring Australia. But if you buy that caravan, it's an assessable asset. It might push you over the threshold. Suddenly, your dream costs you more than just the price of the caravan. It costs you part of your pension. That doesn't feel fair, does it? On the other hand, the assets test does protect the family home. That's a huge benefit. Your home, no matter how valuable, doesn't count. So if you bought a house in Sydney or Melbourne decades ago, and it's now worth $2 million, that's okay. It doesn't affect your pension. Now, the income test has its own quirks. The income test, with its use of deeming, tries to level the playing field. It stops people from hiding their wealth in low-income investments just to maximize their pension. But deeming can also feel unfair. Let's say you're earning 1% interest on your savings, but the deeming rate says you should be earning 3%. Centrelink assumes you're earning more than you actually are. That feels harsh. The income test also penalizes people who keep working. And I understand that. Many people want to keep working, not just for the money, but for purpose, for social connection, for mental health. But every dollar you earn above the threshold reduces your pension by 50 cents. It's called the taper rate, but it feels like a tax on effort. So what's the solution? How do you navigate this system without feeling like you're playing a game you can't win? Let me give you some actionable strategies. Strategy number 1, know your numbers. You cannot make good decisions without knowing where you stand. Sit down, make a list. Write down every asset you own, your superannuation balance, your savings, your shares, your car, your caravan, your investment property. Add it all up. That's your starting point. Then look at your income. What's coming in every fortnight? Wages? Dividends? Rent? Deemed income from your financial assets? Once you know your numbers, you can run the calculations, or better yet, you can see a financial advisor who can run them for you. Strategy number 2, understand the thresholds. The thresholds change every year. They're indexed to inflation, so what was true last year might not be true this year. Go to the Services Australia website, or call Centrelink, or speak to a financial advisor. Get the current thresholds for your situation. Are you single or a couple? Are you a homeowner or non-homeowner? Once you know the thresholds, you can see where you sit. Are you comfortably below? Are you right on the edge? Are you over the limit? This knowledge is power. Strategy number 3, consider your spending strategy. If you're close to a threshold, think about how you spend your money. Let's say you're just above the assets threshold. You're losing part of your pension because of an extra $50,000 in savings. What if you spent some of that money, not recklessly, but on things that improve your life? Home renovations, a new car, dental work, a hearing aid, a mobility scooter. These are things you might need anyway. And here's the important part. Once you've spent the money, it's no longer an assessable asset. I'm not saying you should waste money, but if you're losing pension because you're sitting on cash you don't really need, it might make sense to use that cash for your comfort and well-being. Strategy number 4. Understand the gifting rules. Some people think, I'll just give my money to my kids. Problem solved. Not so fast. Centrelink has gifting rules. You can gift up to $10,000 per financial year with a maximum of $30,000 over 5 years. Anything beyond that, Centrelink still counts as your asset for 5 years. So gifting can be part of your strategy, but it's not a quick fix. Strategy number 5. Consider your investment structure. This is where things get more sophisticated and where a good financial advisor is worth their weight in gold. The type of investments you hold can impact both tests. For example, growth assets like shares that don't pay dividends might have a lower deemed income. Income-producing assets like rental properties will increase your assessable income. Some people move money into superannuation while they're still under 67 because superannuation in the accumulation phase can have different treatment. Others look at account-based pensions and how they're deemed. There's no single right answer. It depends on your circumstances. Strategy number 6. Don't forget the pensioner concession card. Even if you're not eligible for the full age pension, you might still be eligible for a Commonwealth Seniors Health Card or a pensioner concession card. These cards give you access to bulk billed doctor visits, cheaper medications, discounts on rates and utilities. Sometimes the concessions are worth more than a few extra dollars of pension, so don't dismiss them. Strategy number 7. Plan ahead. This is the big one. Don't wait until you're 66 and a half to start thinking about this. If you're in your 50s, start planning now. Look at your projected super balance at retirement. Think about when you'll stop working. Consider what your assets will look like. Run the numbers under different scenarios. The earlier you plan, the more options you have. And finally, strategy number 8. Get professional advice. I know I've said this already, but it bears repeating. The rules are complex. They change. Your situation is unique. A good financial advisor can model your situation. They can show you how different decisions impact your pension. They can help you structure your affairs in a way that's legal, ethical, and maximizes your retirement income. Yes, advice costs money, but the cost of bad decisions costs more. Now, let's bring this all together. We've talked about the history. We've talked about the rules. We've talked about Bruce and Jenny and Tom and Margaret. We've talked about strategies. But here's what I really want you to take away from today. The assets test and the income test are not designed to punish you. They're designed to allocate a limited resource, the age pension, to the people who need it most. Do they always feel fair? No. Do they sometimes penalize good behavior? Yes, but they're the system we have. And the good news is you can work within this system. You can make smart choices. You can protect your pension where possible, and where you can't, you can make peace with it. Because here's the deeper truth. Your retirement isn't just about money. It's not just about passing the assets test or the income test. It's about living well. It's about enjoying this third act of your life. You've spent 40, 50, maybe 60 years working. You've raised families. You've paid taxes. You've contributed to this country. Now it's your time. And whether you get the full pension, a part pension, or no pension at all, you deserve to enjoy these years. So yes, understand the tests. Yes, make smart financial decisions, but don't let the fear of losing a few dollars of pension stop you from living. If you want to buy that caravan, buy it. If you want to take that trip to Europe, take it. If you want to help your grandkids with their education, help them. Money is a tool. It's not the goal. The goal is a life well lived. The goal is peace of mind. The goal is knowing that you did your best, you planned as well as you could, and now you can relax and enjoy the fruits of your labor. I've seen too many people stress themselves into poor health over pension calculations. I've seen people deny themselves simple pleasures because they're afraid of crossing a threshold. Don't be that person. Be informed, be strategic, but also be kind to yourself. You've earned this time. You've earned the right to make choices that bring you joy. And if you lose a bit of pension along the way, that's okay, because the memories you create, the experiences you have, the time you spend with the people you love, those are worth far more than any fortnightly payment. So here's my challenge to you. Today, right now, commit to 3 things. First, commit to understanding your situation. Pull out your paperwork, add up your assets, calculate your income, know where you stand. Second, commit to seeking help if you need it. Book an appointment with a financial advisor. Call Centrelink. Don't try to navigate this alone. And third, commit to living your life. Don't let fear of the assets test or the income test rob you of your dreams. You are not a number on a spreadsheet. You are not a calculation in a government database. You are a human being with hopes, dreams, and a lifetime of experiences. You deserve joy. You deserve peace. You deserve a retirement that feels like a reward, not a punishment. The assets test and income test are just tools. They're part of the landscape, but they don't define your retirement. You define your retirement. So go forward with confidence, go forward with knowledge, and go forward with the understanding that your best years can still be ahead of you. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you feel a little less worried and a little more empowered. And remember, this has been general information only, not personal financial advice. Your next step is to speak with a professional who can look at your unique situation and help you make the best choices for you and your family. Take care of yourself, be kind to yourself, and enjoy this wonderful third act of your life. You've earned it.